continuing discussion of Freud's take on personality, on his psychoanalytic theory or psychodynamic perspective on personality. Previously I talked about the structure of the personality, so we gave a brief description and definition of id, ego, and superego. And I mentioned that, those parts don't always get along. Well, the ego has a difficult job, according in Freud's descriptions. The ego often has to keep that id under control. And the id is not very easy to control. And so there's a lot of anxiety that stems from the animalistic impulses of the id. And so the ego, to try to reduce this anxiety, it can come up with defense mechanisms. And the full name, it would be ego defense mechanisms, but we often just call them defense mechanisms. So, defense mechanisms are essentially self-deception. You engage in some sort of dishonest or perhaps irrational behavior or thinking to try to reduce that anxiety from id impulses. All right, so let's give some examples of defense mechanisms. You might have heard these terms used before, but sometimes people will throw these words around with, perhaps not fully understanding what they mean or what they originally were supposed to mean. So the first one is denial. All right, you probably heard the term denial before, and it has, you can deny something outside of the context of talking about defense mechanisms, but denial is what it sounds like: refusing to acknowledge reality, refusing to recognize or believe the reality of a situation. So, have you ever seen that cartoon where the house is on fire and the little cartoon character, I think it's a dog, is like, this is fine? That's denial, right? They're sort of like, this is fine, everything's fine. Or someone with a drinking problem. Maybe their drinking problem is driven by those id impulses to drink. And the ego is trying to keep everything under control, and to make themselves feel more comfortable, they might just deny and say, oh, I don't have a drinking problem. Everything's fine. This is okay. This is not that bad. All right, so that's some brief examples of denial. Now, you can also have repression. Now, repression is not the same thing as regression. We're starting with repression. Repression blocks anxiety-provoking thoughts from the conscious mind, your conscious awareness. So that's just like, nope, don't want to think about it. Nope. Keep that away from me. Not going to deal with it. And so this is where you might lack memory for something that's actually happened for you. Or somebody's like, hey, do you know this, do you know about this traumatic event? You're like, nope, no, never heard of it. And it might be something you actually experienced. All right, so that's repression. Repression is like, I'm not going to think about that. Not going to think about that. If I did, it would give me anxiety. So nope, push that down into the unconscious. I am not going to deal with that. The ego, which is fully conscious, the ego will not deal with that right now because it is uncomfortable. Now, what is regression? In developmental psychology, we talk about somebody engaging in regression. They are acting as if they are younger or acting younger than you would expect for a given age. This is a retreat to an earlier stage of development, such as childhood or infancy, due to psychological stress. That's where you're like, okay, I'm going to start rocking back and forth. I might want to call my mommy in a time of stress. Or you might just, sometimes people will get really overwhelmed. They wrap themselves up in a blankie and they're like, I want comfort food. And they're trying to have it like they did, like when their mom would take care of them, if they had a mom who took care of them, like when they were sick. Or I know some people, when they get really stressed, they're like, this is too much. I want to color. Freud might explain that in terms of regression. Or, sometimes you see something on TV that reminds you of your childhood, like an old animated show or something. I want to watch this. You might find yourself watching Blue's Clues or The Wiggles or something, and people are like, you're an adult. You're like, let me watch my Wiggles. It's bringing me happy memories. I want to regress back to childhood when things were happier and I didn't have to worry about rent. So this could be considered a defense mechanism too. Now, we also have displacement. So displacement, you're moving something, you're displacing something. What are you displacing? You redirect. You redirect an unconscious, unacceptable wish. So this is one of those desires that you're not supposed to have, or it's not socially acceptable. And you redirect it towards a more acceptable alternative. All right? So, let's say you're really angry with your boss. You want to punch your boss, but you know you can't. Reality principle, the ego's like, yeah, you can't punch your boss. You will get fired. You'll get in big trouble. So maybe you come home and you are horrible to your family members. You will be verbally or even physically aggressive, not that that would be okay to do, to your family members, but really the anger is towards your boss, but you cannot direct it to your boss. You can direct it to your family members or your pets or something like that. Or nowadays, Freud wouldn't have talked about this because this wasn't an option in Freud's time, but nowadays it might include something like venting at trolling people on the internet. You know, finding some people you don't even know and saying horrible things to them on the internet. And it's like, why are you doing that? Well, I'm actually mad at somebody in my own life, but I don't have the option of directing it towards the actual target, someone to direct it at you, person on the internet. All right, so that would be an example of displacement. Now we have sublimation. What is sublimation? Sublime means like, you know, beautiful and wonderful. Sublimation is also a type of displacement, and unacceptable urges are redirected into more appropriate activities. So this is where you engage in something nice, you know, something nice, something almost, you know, beautiful and admirable, but you're redirecting urges. You'd rather be doing something else. So someone creates art. Could be writing a book, writing a song, creating a painting that depicts violent themes, because they can't actually engage in violence. That would be awful. But art is like socially acceptable. And so there you're redirecting in that way. So that would be an example of sublimation. I had a roommate in college who would always joke whenever anybody ate chocolate because of something that was taught in her class. She'd always say, "Are you sublimating?" And we'd be like, "Why do you keep saying that? What are you talking about?" And her professor had told her that people will eat chocolate as a sublimation of sexual urges. Like you can't fulfill your sexual urges, but you can eat chocolate, which releases some of the same hormones or something. That's the way it was described to her. It doesn't work exactly like that. I mean, chocolate's delicious. You don't need to explain it in terms of a defense mechanism. But she loved to throw that one around. Like, it's socially acceptable to eat chocolate, but maybe the sexual desires you have, maybe they would not be. You know, maybe it's with somebody who's in a relationship or something. You know, that would be that example where it would be unacceptable. All right. Reaction formation. Reaction formation. This is the one where the name really doesn't tell you much about what it is. I often think that, it should have the word opposite in it. What sort of reaction do you form? All right. You actually act in the way that's opposite to your true desires with a reaction formation. You change an unacceptable desire by adopting the opposite stance. So the classic example of this is like people who are really homophobic. If you're the person who says, "Gee, you're really upset about gay people," maybe it's because you actually have those feelings yourself. If that is the case, according to Freud, that would be a good example of a reaction formation. You can't accept those desires you have, so you flip them around. You flip around, you do the opposite. Be like, "No, I hate gay people, and I hate the idea of those activities." You know, and it's really because you can't deal with the fact that you actually have those desires. You actually have those urges. And the book gives the example, an unfaithful spouse travels the country speaking about the sanctity of marriage. And we'll see this, we'll have some politicians who will get caught in sex scandals and stuff. Not going to mention anybody in particular, not mentioning its specifics. There are enough examples that we can come up with a few, though, where you'll have a politician get in trouble with some kind of a sex scandal, and sometimes they're the type of politician who is very into, like, purity and family values, and talking about how we need to protect our children from all the sinful temptations, and then it turns out they're engaging in some. Freud would explain that, and well, they're doing that out of reaction formation. Now, projection. You might have heard this term before. I know every once in a while somebody on the internet will say something. They'll accuse somebody of being a bad person, of thinking a certain way, and somebody will come into the comments and be like, projecting much? What does it mean to project? If someone says, you're projecting, you attribute an unconsciously experienced impulse or drive, desire, to someone else. So you have a desire, you accuse somebody else of having that desire. So maybe you are, I don't want to give examples that are like too controversial and icky and stuff like that, but like if a person accuses somebody else, like, oh, you're gross, you're interested in minors, then it turns out that they're accusing you of desires they actually have. So that could be projection. Sometimes you accuse people of stuff that's actually yours. When I worked at a hospital, I worked at a psych hospital, and there was one client in particular. She was there for a while, and she was notorious for accusing us of emotions that were actually hers. She'd be like, you mad? I can tell you're mad. And I'd be like, I'm not mad. Then it turns out she's actually mad. But she would never identify her own feelings. She would accuse us of that. She would accuse us of those feelings, and then it would turn out those are her feelings, but she was projecting them onto us. All right, so the idea with projection is when you accuse people of stuff, you are projecting your own unconscious desires. A recent example of this is a school student. I don't remember exactly where it was, but they did a mural for their school. And it was supposed to be about like diversity and togetherness and unity among students. And some parents got really furious, and they accused her of putting satanic imagery into the mural. And most people who saw the mural, they're like, that's a really nice, pleasant mural. It looks like it's celebrating togetherness among students. How are you seeing like satanic imagery in there? And so some people were like, maybe she's projecting. Maybe the lead mom who was objecting to the mural, they were like, well, maybe she's projecting. Maybe there's some stuff going on with her that she's seeing in this picture, because it's not actually there, but she's seeing it. Another example. I don't know if you remember, you might not. Some of you guys my typical students might be a little too young, but there was a time, it was probably over 10 years ago, where there was a Happy Meal toy that was a Minion. We know who the Minions are, all right? Not just from the annoying memes that show up on Facebook, all right? But there was a Minion toy that it made noises, Minion noises. Minion noises don't actually say anything. They're gibberish. But one mom was furious, because that Minion was saying, what the F? And of course, not F, the actual word here. And people were like, that Minion's not actually saying that. You're hearing it, but that's not actually what the Minion's saying. So some people had fun accusing the main person probably complaining on Facebook. They were accusing them of projection. All right, so what else we got? We got one more. Rationalization. Rationalization, where you use conscious reasoning to explain away anxiety-inducing thoughts and feeling. So, and we can think of this one is probably more familiar to people. We could probably think of examples that would fit as rationalization. Like, technically I did something I wasn't supposed to, but I needed to. It was for a good reason. Technically I lied to someone I love, but it was to protect their feelings. I did it for a good reason. Technically I did steal some money, but then I used that money to buy something for a deserving person. So it's not all bad. All right, so you try to explain away unacceptable stuff about yourself with rationalization. All right, so this is just a sampling. There are other defense mechanisms. These are some of the major ones that I've given you some examples of. All right, so my students, be prepared for some test questions. I'll give you an example, and you have to identify which defense mechanism is being depicted.